Hello, and welcome to Chapter 4 of the Blended Learning Guidebook. So far, we have looked at definitions, theories, models, and principles to guide you to consider when and how to bring blended learning into your course or program. As you've seen, the decision to introduce blended learning goes beyond simply moving some of your learning materials online or adding after-hours discussion boards. Instead, blended learning is about careful, well-planned integration of face-to-face and online activities to build upon each other, as well as new patterns of teaching and learning for you and your students. When designed with these goals and principles in mind, blended learning has the power to transform education in your class and institution. But is your institution prepared for it? Are you, your course, or your students? In this chapter, we will look in more detail at how you might implement blended learning and the conditions necessary for a successful implementation. When I present ideas on blended learning at conferences or workshops, I'm often asked, what's the right balance between classroom and online activities? Is there a certain percentage of the teacher's time that should be spent on each? Sometimes these questions come from administrators wanting to set policies to introduce blended learning across their institutions, or estimate the cost or planning implications of moving a portion of face-to-face time online. As you will understand by now, there is no magic formula for this. Your blend of classroom-based and online activities will depend on a range of factors: the particular learning experiences you want to create, your learners' readiness for online learning, the resources and support available to you and your learners, and much more. And of course, your students will bring their own ideas of a perfect balance into your class, and through their own decisions on where to spend their time and energy, they will each create a blend of their own. This is all part of the collaborative process of direction and dialogue that comes with adopting blended learning. As you read through this chapter, think of implementation not as following a recipe, but as a framework where you can consider the full range of factors and available resources that might support your blended learning plans or put up barriers against them. The framework we use here is the e-quality infrastructure developed by Musami and Lindstrom, which brings together a number of key factors, and the questions they raise are from institutional to evaluative, pedagogical to technological, and instructional design to student and faculty support. You might find technology the most challenging factor, and we'll look more closely at technology in the next chapter. But go through all the sections and ask where you, your students, and your institution are in terms of readiness for blended learning. To help you in judging your own readiness, and perhaps to help you make your case for blended learning, we look at some of the pros and cons, or the motivators and barriers to implementing blended learning. None of these barriers are insurmountable, but even if you are already committed to introducing blended learning to your class or program, try to weigh the pros and cons objectively and think of which steps you may need to take or which resources you may need to find. It's important to take the time to make sure your foundations are solid before you start to build. The chapter then turns its attention to instructional design. Here at Athabasca University, we've found that a peer review process for instructional design works particularly well. You'll find a description of how we structure that process, the teams we create for it, and some of the results we get from following a peer review design process. You might already be familiar with instructional design, and we've already mentioned some instructional design principles in earlier chapters. Our focus in the rest of this chapter is on how the instructional design process changes when we move to blended learning. It will affect how you write your learning objectives and outcomes, the factors you consider in student needs assessments, and how you align your assessment activities with your learning objectives. Learning objectives and learning outcomes will be critical pieces of your instructional design. As with any instructional design, your activities should align with your objectives. However, when you move to blended learning, not only will you have to decide which activities work best through face-to-face learning and which work best online, you will also want to define bridging activities where learners are asked deliberately to find meaningful connections between the work they've done in person and the work they've done online. These bridging activities are crucial when deciding an integrated blended learning course or program. So pay close attention to that section and think of bridging activities you might use in your own situation. As you'll see, it depends in part on the subject matter. We have said before that a focus on the learner is the key to effective blended learning. For that reason, a second important component to your instructional design is the student needs assessment. Blended learning requires new skills and habits of mind. Are your students prepared for blended learning? What else might they need if they're to succeed in this new format? Finally, how do we assess learning in a blended course or program? These sections will wrap up the chapter and should give you a solid beginning to your instructional design and implementation plans. The next few chapters build on our initial design and implementation by looking more closely at the technologies we can use, including learning management systems and open education resources, followed by an overview of activities that work well in blended learning. Good luck!